Rain hammered against the rusted zinc roof of the cramped one-room apartment in Ajegunle, Lagos, seeping through cracks and forming puddles on the cold cement floor. Amaka Nwasu, 32, sat cross-legged on a frayed mat beside the mattress where her 6-year-old son, Chisholm, lay curled up in restless sleep, coughing in his dreams. Her face, etched with fatigue and worry, watched him like a silent prayer. In her hand were a few crumpled Naira notes, 1,200 in total, all that stood between them and complete emptiness. She counted them again, willing them to multiply. By some miracle, the sound of another cough drew her attention back to Chisholm, and she reached out, brushing a wet curl from his forehead. The rain grew heavier, like the sky was grieving with her, when a sudden loud knock on the wooden door made her flinch. She knew who it was before she stood. Mr. Olenade, the landlord. She opened the door a crack and found him already yelling, his breath reeking of beer, his eyes bloodshot with irritation. "You have 48 hours, Amaka," he spat, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "If I don't get my rent by then, you and your bastard are out on the street. This ain't no charity." Before she could utter a word, he shoved the door closed, the bang echoing like a gunshot in the tiny room. Amaka stood frozen for a second, her hand still on the door. Then, as if her strength dissolved all at once, she slid down the wall and pressed her forehead to the damp, peeling paint. "God," she whispered, "what do I have left to sell?" Her eyes drifted upward, unfocused, until they landed on the corner of the wall, on a torn, water-stained flyer that had been hanging there for months. Kidney donors needed urgently 2,500,000 compensation. No questions asked. Call now. Her heart raced. She stared at it for a long, long moment. Then slowly, numbly, she reached for her cheap button phone lying beside her. Her thumb hovered, then pressed. It rang. 1 ring, 2, 3. A click. A flat voice answered, "Yes." Her lips trembled as she forced the words through her clenched throat. "Hello," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm ready." Amaka Nwasu hadn't always been this version of herself, hollow-eyed, sleepless, chasing coins between 2 jobs that drained her body and her soul. Once, she was a top student at the University of Nigeria, Enugu, sharp, ambitious, on track to become the first engineer in her family. Professors admired her, peers envied her. She had plans: graduate with honors, build a life strong enough to lift her family out of generational struggle. But at 22, in her final year, she met Tund, Ajayi, suave, well-dressed twice, her age, and married. He was a guest speaker at a career seminar, and when he lingered after the talk to compliment her brilliance, something stirred in her. It began with phone calls, then dinners, then a "don't worry about your rent this month" sort of kindness that felt like love. Tund promised her stability, protection. He told her she was his real future. By the time Amaka realized the cost of his affection, she was already pregnant. When she told him, his tone changed. "This wasn't part of the plan," he said flatly. 2 weeks later, his number stopped going through. Rumor had it he'd flown to the UK with his wife and children. Alone and ashamed, Amaka returned home to her parents with the news. But their reaction crushed her. Her father, a retired soldier, didn't say a word, just turned his back. Her mother screamed curses she still hears in her sleep. "You've disgraced us. We warned you about men like that." They told her to leave, and she did, carrying only a backpack and her unborn child. She landed in Lagos with no family, no money, no degree, but she had fire. She found a job cleaning classrooms at a small private school in Ajegunle, and later picked up night shifts at a bar, serving beer to men who looked at her like Tund once did. It wasn't enough, but it kept her and baby Chisholm fed, clothed, and indoors. She stayed fierce, even when the apartment leaked, even when her shoes wore through, even when customers grabbed at her waist, because Chisholm needed her. Her son, now 6, thin but bright-eyed, had inherited her will. He drew pictures of rockets and whispered bedtime prayers with fierce conviction. But he also had asthma. The hospital bills came like waves. Inhalers, ER visits, nights spent pacing. She stopped eating dinner some nights to afford medication. The school paid peanuts. The bar job paid in cash and bruises, and rent kept rising. She swallowed it all, never begged, never asked for help. She told herself, if I break, he breaks. I can't let that happen. So she didn't break, not when her stomach growled, not when the landlord banged on the door, not when neighbors pitied her, not when Chisholm coughed through the night. She kept going, held together by string and stubbornness. But that flyer on the wall, the one promising millions for a kidney, that was the first time she considered selling something she couldn't buy back, because the storm was rising, and even stone can crack. The clinic smelled like bleach and bureaucracy. Amika sat stiffly on the edge of the vinyl examination table, hands clasped tightly in her lap, as a nurse drew her blood and handed her yet another form to sign. Her heart pounded, not just from fear, but from resolve, a kind that came only when you had no other choice. She had done it. She'd walked through the gates of the high-end transplant center in Victoria Island, said she was ready, and signed her name. The process moved quickly. Her vitals were good. Her organs were healthy. Within days, the doctor returned with news. She was a match. A high-priority patient, wealthy, critical, anonymous, had been waiting for someone just like her. You're a perfect fit, the doctor said, as though it were a compliment. They offered her an advance, $500,000 to hold her over. Until the procedure date, Amika blinked at the check. She had never seen that much money at once. Her hands trembled as she folded it into her bag. That night, she paid Mr. Olenade in cash, staring him in the eye as she handed him a neat bundle of Naira notes. He sneered, grumbled something about finally acting like an adult, and walked away. Amika didn't care. For the first time in months, they had peace, even if it was temporary. But peace in Lagos was a delicate thing. 2 days later, at dawn, Chisholm's breath grew ragged. She jolted awake to find him wheezing, clawing at his chest. The inhaler wasn't helping. Panic surged in her throat as she wrapped him in a blanket and bolted down the street, trying to flag a kick. They reached a private hospital with cleaner walls and sharper-eyed nurses. But when she reached for her bag, she realized how much she had already spent. She begged, pleaded, cried, "Please, my son is dying. Please help us. I will pay later." The receptionist barely looked up. "We don't treat on credit." Amika dropped to her knees, sobbing as Chisholm gasped in her arms. And then a man stepped forward, tall, sharply dressed in a dark suit, briefcase in hand. Without a word, he handed over his card and paid the 150,000 bill. The nurses suddenly sprang into action, wheeling Chisholm into emergency care. Amika sat stunned, tears streaking her face, unable to find her voice. After a few minutes, the man approached her. "Mrs. Nwosu," he asked quietly. She nodded. "I'm Barrister Ez," he said. "I represent certain interests at the transplant clinic." She blinked, confused. "Why would you help me?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because I've seen desperation before, and because I need you to understand what you're getting into." She stiffened. "Is there a problem with the surgery?" "No," he said. "Medically, you're a fit, but ethically, ... He paused. "Do you know who your kidney is going to?" Amaka shook her head. She didn't ask questions when they told her she'd matched a private client. "You're saving the life of a monster," Barrister Ez said, voice low, deliberate, "and you don't even know it." The hospital lights flickered above them. Somewhere down the hallway, Chisholm's breathing finally began to steady. Amaka stared at the floor, her entire body trembling, not from the cold, but from the terrifying truth that even salvation comes with a price. The rain had returned with a quiet vengeance, trickling down the window pane of the clinic's small waiting room as Amica sat opposite Barrister Ez. Her mind was reeling. She had barely slept after Chisholm's emergency, and now this man, this stranger, had dropped a truth so heavy it left her breathless. The person she had agreed to save, the person whose life her kidney would help extend, was turned ajay. Her past, her ruin. The man who had vanished when she was most vulnerable, who had abandoned her with a newborn and vanished into wealth and silence. Ez leaned forward, eyes sharp. They kept you anonymous for a reason. His wife doesn't know. His family doesn't know. And he doesn't care to know who saves him. To him, you're just a name on a chart. A poor woman willing to trade her body for a check. Amaka felt her fingers curling into fists. That can't be true, she whispered. He WOULDN single quotes. T. But even as she said it, the weight of memory pressed down. He had already done worse. ES opened a file on the table between them. Inside were court documents, emails, bank slips, receipts of betrayal. This, he said, tapping the first page, is the bribe he paid to shut down the family court in Enugu. That case, the one you filed for child support, it never even reached the judge. He made sure of it. Amaka stared, trembling. I thought the case was dismissed because I filed too late. Ez shook his head. It was dismissed because the judge was paid to pretend it never existed. He slid over another page, a bank transaction from years ago, 400,000 wired to a private investigator. He paid these men to find you, not to help, to threaten, to scare you out of going public with his name. That's why you started getting strange phone calls, why someone smashed your window back then. Amaka could hardly breathe. Her whole body felt like it had gone cold. The idea that she had come this close to offering a piece of herself to Tund, a man who had not only abandoned her but actively tried to erase her, and her son, was too much. She felt herself break. Her hands flew to her face as she sobbed, hard and raw. I was going to save him, she choked. I was going to give him something I couldn't even afford to lose, while he tried to erase us. The ache in her chest pulsed like a fresh wound. She thought about Chisholm, coughing in his sleep, fighting to breathe. About the nights she'd walked home from the bar with bruised feet and an empty stomach, all while Tund lived behind security gates, sipping wine, pretending she and their son didn't exist. Ez let the silence stretch. Then, gently, he said, "You don't have to go through with the transplant. Not yet. We can file a suit, not just for child support, for damages, for emotional trauma, for loss of income, for what he did to you. We have enough evidence to make it stick." Amaka looked up, eyes red. "People like him don't fall," she said, voice hollow. "They buy their way out. They bury people like me." "Maybe," Ez admitted, "but this time you wouldn't be buried alone. You'd have a lawyer, a legal team, the press. If needed, I'll stand beside you." Amaka stared down at the folder again, her hand hovering just above it. All her life, she'd chosen survival over confrontation, silence over fire. But now she felt the burn rising in her chest. Not anger, not revenge, just the aching need to be seen, to be heard. For Chisholm to know that his mother didn't let the world trample her without fighting back. And yet, even with that fire flickering, fear stayed wrapped around her like a second skin. Because powerful men don't fall. Not easily, not in Lagos. And if they do, they don't fall alone. The courtroom was tense, packed with journalists, spectators, and whispers that buzzed like mosquitoes under the harsh fluorescent lights. Amaka sat at the plaintiff's table, spine straight but nerves coiled tight. Her palms sweated beneath the weight of what she was about to do. But when she glanced to her left and saw Barrister Ez nod reassuringly, a flicker of steadiness returned to her chest. This was more than just a lawsuit. It was a reckoning. After weeks of soul-searching, of sleepless nights and whispered prayers over Chisholm's frail body, she had chosen not to back down. Tun's lawyers had tried to derail the case from the start. They sent threats masked as warnings. This could destroy your life. They offered hush money, first 1 million, then 5 million, finally 8 million, in neat, silent transfers that showed up in her inbox with subject lines like a final gift. She rejected them all. "I'd rather be poor and free," she told Ez, than paid and voiceless. When the trial began, the media latched on quickly. The story of the poor single mother who almost gave her kidney to the same man who abandoned her had the makings of a tabloid spectacle. But Amika's truth wasn't spectacle, it was survival. On the witness stand, her voice trembled at first. The room fell silent as she began. "I was 21. I believed him when he said he'd take care of me. I believed him when he said I mattered." She paused. The silence begged her to continue. "But when I told him I was pregnant, he disappeared. I lost my family. I lost my home. I scrubbed toilets during the day and waited tables at night so my son could have medicine when he couldn't breathe. And the man who left us to suffer is the same man whose life I almost saved with my own body." Gasps rippled through the room. Even the judge blinked slowly, folding his hands. "I'm not asking for pity," Amaka continued. "I'm asking for justice, for my son, for every woman who has been made invisible by a man with money and power." The defense tried to paint her as vindictive, money-hungry, unstable, but it didn't stick. Not after EAs presented the bank records, the court bribes, the threatening messages, and not after the twist that stunned even the judge when mid-testimony, the courtroom doors opened and Chisholm walked in, holding a social worker's hand. Then, Amaka's the boy looked small under the high ceilings, but his presence shifted something in the room. Amaka bent down and took his hand, tears filling her eyes. "This is my son," she said quietly. "He is the reason I never gave up, and he is the reason I'm standing here today." The judge leaned back, visibly moved. He asked few questions. He didn't need many. The truth had been laid bare. Days later, when the ruling came, it was decisive. Tundajai was found liable. The court ordered him to pay 10 million in damages to Amaka, along with monthly child support payments, retroactive from the day Chisholm was born. He would also lose access to any transplant from her, effective immediately. The final blow came when the story hit the national news. His wife, stunned by the betrayal and humiliated by the headlines, filed for separation. His business partners began to distance themselves. The empire he had built on lies began to shake. As for Amaka, she walked out of the courthouse holding Chisholm's hand. Reporters shouted questions. Microphones waved. But she said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence, this time, was not powerlessness. It was victory. With the court settlement finally in her account, Amaka moved carefully, not with the frenzy of sudden wealth, but with the quiet focus of someone who had fought for every kobo. She rented a small sunlit shop in the heart of her neighborhood and opened Mama Chisam's kitchen, a modest canteen serving warm, affordable meals. The aroma of pepper soup, jollof rice, and freshly fried plantain soon became a comfort. Two locals who had long survived on cheap bread and sachet water. But Amaka didn't open the business for profit. Alone she hired 3 other single mothers, women she knew from her years of hardship, who had children and scars of their own. They cooked together, shared stories, wiped each other's tears when needed, and built something dignified out of what life had nearly crushed. Chisholm, now stronger with proper medication and healthy meals, was enrolled in a better school with clean classrooms and actual inhalers in the nurse's office. He began to smile more, to laugh without coughing, to come home with stories about books and friends. His eyes, once dulled by sickness, now danced with curiosity. Amaka, for the first time in years, could sleep without one ear tuned to the wheeze of her son's breath. Her nights were no longer filled with bleach-scented bar floors and drunken hands grazing too close. She was done cleaning up other people's mess. Her hands now served food, nurtured hope, and built legacy. And through it all, Barrister Ez remained by her side, not as a savior, but as a companion. He stopped by the canteen, often helping Chisholm with homework when she was busy, or dropping off fresh produce from a nearby farm he invested in. There was something steady and unspoken between them, not romance yet, but a warm, mutual respect that made Amaka feel seen without needing to perform. One quiet evening, after closing up the shop, Amaka sat by the window with a piece of paper in her hand, the original kidney donor agreement, her name signed at the bottom, as if her body could be bartered. She tore it in for precise pieces, no anger, just finality. Then she placed the torn paper in an envelope, scribbled a note, and mailed it to Tun's lawyer. The note read simply, "This was never yours to take." She didn't expect a reply. She didn't need one. The woman who had once begged to be seen now knew her worth, and it could never again be bought. One quiet night in a Jeginal, the electricity held long enough for a faint breeze to pass through the cracked window pane of Amaka Noosu's small apartment. The streets outside were unusually calm. No arguing neighbors, no generator rumble, no blaring horns, just the soft night hum of Lagos. Surrendering to sleep, inside the tiny bedroom, Chisholm lay tucked under a thin blanket, his chest rising and falling gently. For the first time in weeks, there was no wheezing, no sudden fits of cough, no restless tossing. His breathing was smooth, unbroken. Amaka stood over him for a moment longer than usual, her eyes taking in the soft glow of the rechargeable lamp that dimly lit his innocent face. His cheeks, once sunken from illness, now held a healthy glow. She bent low and kissed his forehead, whispered "I love you" in a voice made of everything she had ever endured. Then, slowly, she rose and walked barefoot back into the living room. There, near the window, sat a desk she had rescued from the back of a school warehouse 6 months ago. She had sanded it herself, painted it light blue, and every time she sat at it, it reminded her of what it meant to build something new from what others threw away. She reached for a fresh notebook, one she had kept hidden under a stack of old receipts and borrowed textbooks. Its cover was plain, brown cardboard, with a black spiral spine. As she opened it, the pages crackled softly. It was the sound of a beginning. Amaka took a pen from the cup beside her and stared at the first page. For a while, she didn't write anything. She just breathed, thought, remembered. The hospital corridors, the smell of bleach and panic, the sound of her son choking for air. The day she had counted her last naira under the dim bulb of this same room. The kidney clinic's sterile silence. The moment she realized the life she was about to save belonged to the very man who had once stolen hers. Then, in quiet, deliberate strokes, she wrote across the top of the page, asterisk things I thought I had to lose to survive. Asterisk, she paused. Her hand hovered above the paper, steady now. As she began to list the things that had once felt like sacrifices required by the world, just to keep breathing my body. She had once believed her body was all she had left, to offer first to a man who promised to love her, then to a system that priced her health like a market commodity. She thought giving up part of herself was the only way to keep Chisholm safe, but she hadn't. She'd walked away, whole. She drew a single, deliberate line through the words, my voice. She had been silenced by shame, by poverty, by threats, by the brutal weight of being unseen. Courts didn't listen to women like her. Men like Tund didn't face consequences. That's what everyone said. But she had stood in front of a judge, trembling but unbroken, and spoken the truth. She had used her voice to shake the foundations of a man who believed he was untouchable. She struck a line through it. My dignity. For years, she had scrubbed toilets, served drinks to leering men, walked home in the dark with tired feet and a clenched jaw. She had knelt before landlords, begged doctors, cried quietly in places where no one could see. But she never stopped fighting, never stopped loving her son with a ferocity that poverty couldn't dim. And in the end, she didn't give away her dignity. She defended it in court. In life, in the eyes of her child, she crossed it out. The lines weren't erasures, they were proof. She hadn't lost these things. She had kept them, even when everything told her she couldn't. A marker closed the notebook softly, like sealing something sacred. She looked around the small room, the patched curtains, the second-hand couch, the framed picture of her and Chisholm on the day he started his new school. In the corner, her modest food canteen business ledger sat neatly stacked, with bills paid, salaries recorded, supplies ordered. She had not just survived, she had started again. Her phone buzzed gently. A message from Barrister Ez. Just checking in. How's your boy, and how are you? Asterisk, she smiled. A real one, the kind that softened her eyes and unclenched her jaw. We're good, resting, thank you, really. Asterisk, she put the phone aside, walked back to the bedroom doorway and glanced one last time at Chisholm, then returned to the desk, pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, and flicked off the lamp. The room faded into stillness. Outside, Lagos kept moving in its endless chaos, its noise, its hustle. But in that tiny apartment, a woman had reclaimed her life, quietly, powerfully, irreversibly. The screen fades to black, and across it, these final words appear, glowing softly, without sound. Asterisk, she gave her son a future and kept her soul.